The month passed quickly for Hastings, and left few definite impressions after it. It did leave some, however. One was a painful impression of meeting Mr. Bladen on the Boulevard des Capucines, in company with a very pronounced young person whose laugh dismayed him. And when at last he escaped from the cafe, where Mr. Bladen had hauled him to join them in a box, he felt as though the whole boulevard was looking at him, and judging him by his company. Later, an instinctive conviction regarding the young person with Mr. Bladen sent the hot blood into his cheek, and he returned to the pension in such a miserable state of mind that Miss Byng was alarmed, and advised him to conquer his homesickness at once. Another impression was equally vivid. One Saturday morning, feeling lonely, his wanderings about the city brought him to the Gare Saint-Lazare. It was early for breakfast, but he entered the hotel terminus and took a table near the window. As he wheeled about to give his order, a man passing rapidly along the aisle collided with his head, and looking up to receive the expected apology, he was met instead by a slap on the shoulder and a hearty, "What the deuce are you doing here, old chap?" It was Roden, who seized him and told him to come along. So, mildly protesting, he was ushered into a private dining room where Clifford, rather red, jumped up from the table and welcomed him with a startled air, which softened the unaffected glee of Rowden and the extreme courtesy of Elliot. The latter presented him to 3 bewitching girls, who welcomed him so charmingly, and seconded Rowden in his demand that Hastings should make one of the party. He consented at once. While Elliot briefly outlined the projected excursion to La Roche, Hastings delightedly ate his omelette, and returned the smiles of encouragement from Cecile and Colette and Jacqueline. Meantime, Clifford in a bland whisper was telling Rowden what an ass he was. Poor Rowden looked miserable until Elliot, divining how affairs were turning, frowned on Clifford and found a moment to let Rowden know that they were all going to make the best of it. "You shut up," he observed to Clifford. "It's fate, and that settles it." "It's Rowden, and that settles it," murmured Clifford, concealing a grin. For after all, he was not Hastings' wet nurse. So it came about that the train, which left the Gare Saint-Lazare at 9:15 a.m., stopped a moment in its career towards Havre, and deposited at the Red Roof station of La Roche, a merry party, armed with sunshades, trout rods, and one cane, carried by the non-combatant Hastings. Then, when they had established their camp in a grove of sycamores which bordered the little river Epte, Clifford, the acknowledged master of all that pertained to sportsmanship, took command. "You, Rowden," he said, "divide your flies with Elliot and keep an eye on him, or else he'll be trying to put on a floating sinker. Prevent him by force from grubbing out for worms." Elliot protested, but was forced to smile in the general laugh. "You make me ill," he asserted. "Do you think this is my first trout?" "I shall be delighted to see your first trout," said Clifford, and dodging a fly-hook, hurled with intent to hit, proceeded to sort and equip 3 slender rods, destined to bring joy and fish to Cecile, Colette, and Jacqueline. With perfect gravity, he ornamented each line with 4 split shot, a small hook, and a brilliant quill float. "I shall never touch the worms," announced Cecile with a shudder. Jacqueline and Colette hastened to sustain her, and Hastings pleasantly offered to act in the capacity of general baiter and taker-offer of fish. But Cecile, doubtless fascinated by the gaudy flies in Clifford's book, decided to accept lessons from him in the true art, and presently disappeared up the Epte with Clifford in tow. Elliot looked doubtfully at Colette. "I prefer gudgeons," said that damsel with decision. "And you, Monsieur Murden, may go away when you please, may they not, Jacqueline?" "Certainly," responded Jacqueline. Elliot, undecided, examined his rod and reel. "You've got your reel on a wrong side up," observed Rawdon. Elliot wavered and stole a glance at Colette. I have almost decided to, not to flip the flies about just now," he began. "There's the pole that Cecile left." "Don't call it a pole," corrected Rawdon. "Rod, then," continued Elliot, and started off in the wake of the two girls, but was promptly collared by Rawdon. "No, you don't. Fancy a man fishing with a floating sinker when he has a fly rod in his hand. You come along." Where the placid little Epte flows down between its thickets to the Seine, a grassy bank shadows the haunt of the gudgeon, and on this bank sat Colette and Jacqueline and chattered and laughed and watched the swerving of the scarlet quills, while Hastings, his hat over his eyes, his head on a bank of moss, listened to their soft voices and gallantly unhooked the small and indignant gudgeon, when a flash of a rod and a half-suppressed scream announced a catch. The sunlight filtered through the leafy thickets, awaking to song the forest birds. Magpies in spotless black and white flitted past, alighting near, burring with a hop and bound and twitch of the tail. Blue and white jays with rosy breasts shrieked through the trees, and a low sailing hawk wheeled among the fields of the ripening wheat, putting to flight flocks of twittering hedge-birds. Across the Seine, a gull dropped on the water like a plume. The air was pure and still. Scarcely a leaf moved. Sounds from a distant farm came faintly, the shrill cock-crow and dull braying. Now and then a steam-tug with big raking smoke-pipe, bearing the name Guep 27, piled up the river, dragging its interminable train of barges, or a sailboat dropped down with the currents towards sleepy Rhone. A faint fresh odour of earth and water hung in the air, and through the sunlight orange-tipped butterflies danced above the marsh grass. Soft velvety butterflies flapped through the mossy woods. Hastings was thinking of Valentine. It was 2 o'clock when Elliot strolled back, and frankly admitting that he had eluded Rawdon, sat down beside Colette and prepared to doze with satisfaction. "Where are your trout?" said Colette severely. "They still live," murmured Elliot, and went fast asleep. Rawdon returned shortly after, and casting a scornful glance at the slumbering one, displayed 3 crimson black trout. "And that," smiled Hastings lazily, "that is the holy end to which the faithful plod, the slaughter of these small fish with a bit of silken feather." Rawdon disdained to answer him. Colette caught another gudgeon and awoke Elliot, who protested and gazed about the lunch baskets, as Clifford and Cecile came up demanding instant refreshment. Cecile's skirts were soaked, and her gloves torn, but she was happy, and Clifford, dragging out a 2-pound trout, stood still to receive the applause of the company. "Where the deuce did you get that?" demanded Elliot. Cecile, wet and enthusiastic, recounted the battle, and then Clifford eulogized her powers with the fly, and, in proof, produced from its creel a defunct chub, which, he observed, just missed being a trout. They were all very happy at luncheon, and Hastings was voted charming. He enjoyed it immensely. Only it seemed to him at moments that flirtation went further in France than in Millbrook, Connecticut, and he thought that Cecile might be a little less enthusiastic about Clifford that perhaps it would be quite well if Jacqueline sat further away from Weldon, and that possibly Colette could have, for a moment at least, taken her eyes from Elliot's face. Still, he enjoyed it, except when his thoughts drifted to Valentine, and then he felt that he was very far away from her. La Roche is at least an hour and a half from Paris. It is also true that he felt happiness, a quick heartbeat, when at 8 o'clock that night, on the train which bore them from La Roche, rolled into the Gare Saint-Lazare, and he was once more in the city of Valentine. "Good night," they said, pressing around him. "You must come next time." He promised, and watched them, 2 by 2, drift into the darkening city, and stood so long that, when he raised his eyes, the vast boulevard was twinkling with gas jets, through which the electric lights stared like moons.